Hey everybody, before we start the show, I wanted to let you know that this episode of Tabletop Babble is brought to you by D&D Beyond. D&D Beyond, you know them. They are the official digital toolset and game companion for Dungeons and Dragons. Now, D&D Beyond does a lot of stuff. You probably know them for their character builder, but they've also got an encounter builder coming out, and they're constantly making improvements to the site. But one of the best things about them is all of their amazing free content. So the basic rules are in there. You can play around with that, build a character for free, see if you like D&D Beyond, that kind of thing. But they've also got great videos from Todd Kenrick, awesome articles from writers like James J. Hake, Ashley Warren, DC. Heck, you know what? I have written for D&D Beyond. So you're going to want to go check out all that sweet, sweet free content at dndbeyond.com. That's dndbeyond.com. Tell them DSPN sent you. This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. Today on the show, it is extremely exciting. This has been a while in the making. I've got count them three professional television writers coming on, and they also love to play role-playing games. So we are going to talk with them about that. I've got Chris Tallman on. You might know him from Nerd Poker. Ryan Raditz, Matt Young. They're all on here. It's going to be a lot of fun. It was a great conversation, so let's get to it. Okay, everybody, now I am here with three great creators. I'm super excited to have this chat. Let's start with you, Matt. Introduce yourself and let people know what you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games and with writing in general.
Great. First of all, James, thanks so much for having us. We're really excited to chat with you today. I'm Matt Young. I am a board gamer, role player, game master who, thanks to this amazing RPG renaissance we're in, has come back to RPGs in the last few years after being away from the hobby for far too long a time. I'm currently running a number of D&D 5e games, and I play as a player in some Adventures League sessions with my daughter, Nora, and I'm a player in a Call of Cthulhu campaign, Masks of Nyarlathotep. As for writing, in addition to a little bit of feature work, my main gig has been on the last 3 seasons of Blind Spot on NBC.
Yes, that is really, really cool that we have you on here and you've worked with all of these different role-playing games and you're writing for Blind Spot, which has a cast member of Critical Role on it. So
yeah, that's right. Yeah, Ashley and I have chatted about our shared love of D&D, and I've not yet gotten to play with her, but I hope to do so someday. So.
That's awesome. Yes, yeah. RPG synergy happening all over the place. That's crazy. How about you, Chris? Who are you and what do you do in the world of role-playing games and writing?
I was playing D&D back when it first came out in like the late 70s and early 80s. I was playing as a kid in Wisconsin. And then similar to Matt, it sort of fell away. And then probably like 4 or 5 years ago, it kind of came back around again. I'm friends with a lot of people who do a podcast called Nerd Poker. It's a Brian Posehn live D&D podcast. And so I was a guest, and then people kept on not being able to make it. So I was able to become a full cast member. So now I'm playing it multiple times, sometimes every week, which is incredible. And then I'm in a game with these guys as well, with Ryan and Matt. And it's great. I love it. I play similar to Matt. I play with my daughters. It's a great family thing for us to bond. And as a nerd, of course, I'm delighted that my daughter is showing interest in it. I'm trying not to force it on her because, as you know, every time you're trying to force your nerd thing on your kid, it doesn't go great. So she's into it, which I love. Writing wise, I've been writing stuff for a long time. I was back in the 90s. I was in a sketch group on Comedy Central called the Bert Ferschners. And then more recently, I was writing for Nickelodeon on a sitcom called Night Squad, which for them was like a swords and sorcery. But to me, I was like, this is a D&D sitcom, which was always fun for me to try and get as much monsters and magic in every episode, as well as teen angst, which is probably what they were more interested in.
That's amazing. That's so cool. It's great to have you here. I love listening to Nerd Poker and everything. So it is really, really cool to have you on the show, and big fan of, stuff that happens on Nickelodeon. I think that's really cool. And how about you, Ryan? Who are you? What do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games and writing?
Well, hey, James, thanks again for having us on. I've kind of like Chris. I'm actually from Wisconsin and played D&D in the 80s growing up as a kid. And I lived 10 minutes from the original Gen Con. Every year, this is free-range kids in the 80s. My mom would drop us off at like 10 a.m. at Gen Con and say, I'll see you at 5 o'clock. And we just go every year.
That's awesome.
So I got into it through my older brother, who was cool enough to let me start playing with his crew when I was like 9 years old. But kind of like Matt, I dropped out just for a long time until 5th edition came around. Not for any reason, but for some reason, 5th edition, with its focus on storytelling and inclusivity, and all of a sudden I knew other people who didn't look exactly like me who were playing, and it was like just suddenly it just seemed to have shown up on my radar. And so now I'm playing a lot. I play with Matt and Chris, like you were saying. 2 of my nieces play from like different siblings of mine, so it's like I just love how almost in a family sense, a bunch of people I know are playing it. And I also play now with my 7-year-old son. We've been playing a Lego version of D&D, and we've just moved into the Theater of the Mind version. Yeah, and then on the writing side, I'm a comedy writer. I write on sitcoms, and I've written some kids animation stuff too. I'm currently on a show called The Neighborhood on CBS, which is just a straight ahead, old school, filmed in front of a live audience sitcom. And this year in season 2, we actually did an episode where the characters played D&D together, which was super fun. Edric the Entertainer playing first reluctantly and then enjoying it to play some 5th edition D&D. So it's been fun to try and sneak my love of RPGs into the shows I write on and stuff. So yeah, that's me.
Wow. That's amazing. That's so cool.
Yeah, it was really fun.
That's great. That's great. You made Cedric the Entertainer play D&D. I love it. I love it.
And in fact, one of the other actors on the show, Marcel Spears, who was his character, Marty, is a awesome nerd who works at JPL, and he's an engineer, and he loves D&D. The character loves D&D, and so does the actor. So it brought people together and introduced a lot of people who had no idea, except as a punchline, what D&D was to what the game actually is. So it was fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you all for being here. This is really great because we're going to talk about sort of role-playing games and writing and how it all relates. So my first question for you is, how does the writing work you do affect the RPGs you play and the scenarios that you create with your friends around the table? Matt, let's start with you.
Well, I think there are a lot of similarities between RPGs and TV writing, and working on a sort of ensemble kind of mission-based action show like Blind Spot. I found that one really helps the other. Things like starting your session with a bang and leaving it off on a bit of a cliffhanger, incorporating backstory and individual character arcs and dramas into your game sessions. Even in already published scenarios, really kind of brings the whole thing to life in a new way. Because like there might be a bunch of car chases and gunfights and explosions on a TV show, but most of the time the focus is really on the sort of the emotional lives of the characters and what drives them. Making sure to include like their hopes and dreams and faults and flaws, and then see how all of that interacts with the events of a larger story.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a great point about we love the excitement of an action scene, but a lot of the focus is on the characters. Those I think are the best role-playing games. What about you, Chris? How do you think your writing work affects the RPGs you play?
I think it's a lot of what Matt just said. One thing that really leaps out in my head is there was a J.J. Abrams show, I guess started in the 2000s, called Alias. It was an hour-long action drama. And one of the things they did in terms of storytelling on that show, every episode would begin in the middle of a fight that was sort of actually the climax from the previous episode. And then they would get into the storytelling, they'd wrap up their story, and then they'd actually instead of ending the episode where it's like, okay, all wrapped up, they then go ahead and kick off the next mission and just get into that action and cut it off there. And that became then the action sequence for the next episode. And just the way you can tweak, like Matt was saying, if you kick it off in the middle of chaos, everybody is in. Everybody's like, oh no, we're being attacked. I don't even know who everybody is. And I feel like improv informs that a lot as well, which is we're just going to start with a bang. Everybody jumps in. And then you let the role players sort of dictate where it goes from there. I think one of the hardest parts is having, I don't know about you guys, but it seems like to run a successful episode, let's say, of playing together, you have to have like 9 different scenarios ready to go because you don't know where anybody's going to be. So I think that's a big part of it as well, which is like, okay, well, we might go here, so I have to have that ready. And in every sequence, it's like you want to have some character, but you do want to have some kobolds with some poison darts as well.
Yes. Yes, that is a great recipe for good D&D. I love that. How about you, Ryan? What do you think? Does your writing work affect the RPGs that you play?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it does in a couple ways, and I agree with what Matt and Chris just said about the scale of the action and where to cut it off. That's obviously when we're writing when I write a TV sitcom, I'm in a room with a group of people, and so it is very easy to come up with a scenario, and someone, sometimes it's me, will be like, oh, they just did this on this other show, or like to come up. I think there's a challenge we have in writing sitcoms is we've all grown up with them. We've seen them a billion times. And it's easy to walk away from an idea because it seems like a cliche scenario. And I've encountered that in RPGs too. But what has worked in our show, hopefully, and has certainly worked in RPGs is going, well, what do our characters bring to this scenario? Because like in every sitcom, you're going to see the episode where they go bowling and get into a competition. Like it's been done. Like it's going to happen in season 2. If it's a kid show, they're going to do a body switching episode. They're going to do a Romeo and Juliet episode. Like it's all been done before. But the answer that we look for and work hard to find on our shows is, well, how do our characters encounter this scenario in a new way, in an interesting way, in a way that's specific to them? And hopefully, in the games I've DM'd in D&D, like hopefully, yes, we're going to fight a dragon, but hopefully we're going to do it in an interesting way. So I try to ask those questions of how can I bring these characters to a new place? And the other thing that comes up in our writing room all the time, and this is sort of a battle between us and the network, and this happens, I've heard about this happening in a lot of TV shows. We always think it's funny and interesting when our characters have flaws. We think that is often the most fun we have is when we can make our sitcom characters sometimes as dumb as possible, or as selfish as possible, or as greedy or driven for the wrong things. That's what leads to excitement for us. And often the network, and I totally get this, we get the note of like, hey, let's make sure they're good at their job. You know, you can't. We want the audience is going to want to believe in this character and like this person and let them into their living room. So that there's a constant and very healthy push and pull between are they good at their job, or how much of their flaws can we emphasize? And I think when I was a kid playing D&D, all I did every time was when I was like 9 years old was like, well, let's go fight Tiamat today and get a bunch of treasure. Like it was all about being a superhero. And I think as an adult, it's so much more fun to focus on our characters' flaws in the game and the limitations and the obstacles they have. And from a writing standpoint, we often find the most fun in what's holding our character back, as opposed to just how do they dominate and become a total hero. So that's kind of, it seems like a similar conversation we have in the writer's room that we also sometimes see at the table of where are we having the most fun.
Yeah, I mean, well, to jump on Ryan's point there, some of the most enjoyable times we've had were when no one in the party could get over a wall. You know, like we spent half an hour trying to figure out a way to get over a wall that no one could seem to do it. So like these otherwise pretty capable heroes having this just utterly, disastrous attempt at doing this normally fairly simple thing, but it was one of the most memorable nights that I've had in a while at a table. So
Something that Ryan had just said about the flaws and things. I feel like I get this. I think I realized it more when I started watching live play RPGs now, like something like Critical Role or something where, as an audience member, or I guess a player watching other people play characters, once you start to understand who the other characters are, then I think you really start enjoying, like, oh, the treasure's there, but we have to go fight the monster. But we all know that one rogue who's pretty selfish is going to duck away in the middle of the fight to try and get the treasure. And I feel like those character things, those flaws, sometimes bring us a tremendous amount of enjoyment because without realizing it as a fellow player or an audience member, you're already kind of thinking about another scenario that could happen just because you know, oh, she's so greedy, she's going to mess this up, or oh, that guy's a coward, he's not going to fight the dragon.
Yeah.
And I like that aspect a lot, is you start investing in these imaginary, but they feel very real characters.
Yeah, it's true. Especially, I love that moment that, the DM learns these things and the other players do too. And you start to set each other up for moments, right? By like, if you have a character who truly hates squash, all of a sudden squash is getting a spotlight in every single game. And it's like, oh yeah. And this villain who's definitely eating squash right now, right? And it's like, oh, everybody turns and looks at the barbarian and good stuff. I love stuff like that. So as far as sort of process and creativity, how do you think the two are alike? Like, how is screenwriting like playing an RPG with your friends? I think we've hit on a lot of this and how one affects the other, but like, are there creative processes that are the same? What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I think so. I just, for Nerd Poker, for our Patreon, I just was lucky enough I got to DM. We did for the holidays a 2-part Star Wars D&D 5e kind of mashup thing. And so in creating the storyline for that, you have to kind of start with your characters and thinking, well, like a lot of, especially with Dungeons and Dragons, I think the comparison I've heard a lot is murder hobos. So you kind of have to go, all right, these guys are going to walk into this spaceport or this ship or this room, and they're looking to destroy stuff. So you kind of have to start building those blocks and go, okay, so who are they going to fight? And then we want to go somewhere. And then because it's Star Wars, you want to have, or whatever genre you're working in, there are certain tenets. Like I'm sure with Blind Spot, it's like, oh, okay, there's going to be agents and there's going to be gunfire. And I think you want to play with Dungeons and Dragons, you want to play to your strengths. I want traps. I want monsters. I want a hidden door. I want a place maybe where magic all of a sudden doesn't work. And everybody, screenwriter or not, I think everybody in their head has those things like, oh, just as an audience member, I can't wait to watch them fight a monster that's way too big for them. How are they going to get out of it? So I feel like that's for me, that's the big crossover between being a storyteller versus an RPG player. They're kind of the same.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, this is a cool question because I think, like Chris said, that there's a ton of overlap between RPGs and any type of screenwriting or any type of writing, because ultimately we're all just sitting around a campfire telling a story. In my experience, I've done comedy writing on TV shows where we all go off individually to our office and write alone. And that to me is the most like being a DM and prepping for an adventure, because you're sitting there alone with a toolbox full of skills and a whole bunch of ideas that you possibly need to incorporate if you're on a show and your showrunner said, here's the outline, but you still get to make it. So there are times when screenwriting is very isolated in a fun way. And I feel like that's prepping for an adventure as a DM. The show I write on now, the Neighborhood, it's a sitcom where nobody writes alone in their office. You're always in a room with maybe 6, maybe 12 people coming up with something together. And that, at its best, that is like sitting around a table playing an RPG, because you are collaborating and yes-anding and agreeing or disagreeing and having these interesting discussions. The big difference, I think, though, between for me, between screenwriting and RPGs is, for me, I love my job. I love being a TV writer. It's really fun. But at the end of the day, it is my job. And the difference between a career and a hobby is the hobby can be for itself. I love playing RPGs because it exists. Maybe here's what I'm trying to say. Here's what I'm trying to say in a more concise way. In screenwriting, I am working with other people and having fun and working hard, but we are telling a story for other people. In an RPG, we are telling a story for ourselves. And that is something, once I became a professional TV writer, it's no longer for myself. It's for money. It's a great career. But when I sit around the table and we start a new D&D campaign, we know this is in real time. It's happening right now, and it's happening just for us. And that for me, that is a thing I hope I never give up, because it's really fun to tell a story for yourself and for your friends at one moment in time. I think that's rare to get anywhere else these days.
Yeah, it is true. And especially, you mentioned earlier, you have the studio, and you have a lot of different people you're negotiating with too, kind of when you're writing something, right? Professionally for broadcast. But you don't necessarily have that. You just have your friends at the table who you're kind of negotiating the story with when you're playing.
That's a great point. There's no, you are the audience and the storyteller at the same time. And that is, that doesn't happen anywhere else, unless you're just hanging out with your friends. So,
hey, everybody, just wanted to take a quick break to let you know that this episode of Tabletop Babble is brought to you by Capers. That's right, Capers. What is Capers? It's a super-powered role-playing game of gangsters in the Roaring 20s. You play criminals or cops during the Prohibition era, and you have superpowers. Will you build a criminal empire or work to bring bootleggers down? Now listen, if you've listened to Tabletop Babble, you know about this amazing game. I contributed a tiny bit to it, but it is truly the brainchild of genius designer Craig Campbell, who is a friend of this show and a great friend of mine. Well, he is currently kickstarting the deluxe hardcover. That's right. So if you have the game, if you love the game, now you can get it in deluxe hardcover. And if you've never gotten the game, this is the perfect time to check out. Why? The deluxe hardcover is 164 pages in 8.5 by 11 hardcover glory. Smythe sewn binding, it's sturdy, and it lays flat on the table. It's glossy, full color interior with richer printing press color. End pages and inside covers are printed with useful tables, game information, and lore. Plus, there are 2 ribbon bookmarks. Man, I love those. Those are so super useful. More upgrades are coming to the book with stretch goals, so you're going to want to go check it out. Plus, Capers is just an amazing game. You'll get the full game there with more than 40 superpowers plus character options, GM guidelines, a full cast of NPCs. You've got a backdrop information on over a dozen U.S. cities during the era, info on gangs and law enforcement. It is spectacular. Check it out. Backer tiers for getting the deluxe hardcover with all the support PDFs, just the hardcover, or just the PDFs are available. There's also a Capers enamel pin available as an add-on. So, if you love Capers, you are going to love the deluxe hardcover. If you have never checked out Capers, now is the perfect time to do so. Head on over to Kickstarter, search for Capers, and let Craig know DSPN sent you. Let's get back to the babble. How about you, Matt? Where do you see the overlap in how RPGs and screenwriting are alike?
Well, I definitely agree with everything that Chris and Ryan said. The only thing that I would add is that this idea of kind of disruption of what's happening. As in both, screenwriting and in role-playing games, you're probably most often dealing with an ensemble, each bringing something different and unique and kind of specialized to the table. And I guess at its most basic level, you're usually trying to create conditions by which some kind of dramatic change can happen. Whether it's like a personal, intimate kind of transformation that's centered around one of the characters, or it could be like a world-ending dragon god who's coming to devour the whole realm or whatever. In both instances, the focus is on kind of exploring events that spur our characters into some kind of action. You introduce a new element into the world, you give them something to overcome and a reason to be invested in it. And then you just see how they cleverly navigate the scenario, both in screenwriting and in RPGs. And you sort of see how they and the world are, you see how they and the world around them are changed. And that then creates, kind of like Chris was saying, creates brand new conditions, which then have to be adjusted and explored and so on. And so each new change brings a whole new series of possibilities and options for the story and for the characters. So, what they do becomes the story and affects the world in ways that then lead to new story.
Yeah, it's so true, right? And as characters evolve, the world evolves with them, and because of the actions that they've taken often, right?
As we're talking about this, I'm kind of realizing that obviously when you're writing on a show or for a thing, you're the servant of another master. You know what I mean? It's like, unless it's your TV show, you're telling somebody else's story. So you kind of know we're trying to execute the perfect bank heist or whatever the story is. Whereas with D&D, I feel like, or just games in general, where you're so interactive with the players. Have you guys ever found yourselves going, oh, I thought this was going to be the bank heist, but it turns out they ran away from the bank and they figured out who the robbers are. And so now we're on this other thing. Do you find you guys are ever making up the story as it's like, oh, we're not doing any of the stuff I prepped at all, and instead you're doing this very improvisational, like you're saying, a group storytelling sitting around the fire? And because you happen to be the game master that particular day, you're driving the car, but you are, in a sense, just sort of making up the story as it's happening. Does that happen to you guys at all when you're running games?
It's totally happened to me. I feel like, and what's weird? It also has happened to me in the writer's room. I made up a phrase for how I feel when the story goes a different direction than I wanted it to. And that is story sad. So I feel story when. What's interesting as a writer, the game for me is how quickly can I let go of that feeling, because it's a real feeling. Like sometimes you'll be in the room and riffing, the writer's room, and everyone's like, oh, the story's going this way, and your boss will come in and say, for any reason, like, oh no, it has to go this way. And there's always that moment of like, oh no, like I'm a DM who prepped this cool adventure. It's like, oh no. Instantly it feels like closed doors pop up. And that is a natural feeling. I've identified that, like, okay, that's fine. How quickly can I let that go is the game I try to play with myself, because both in a professional context, obviously your job is to let that go and to go this new direction. But even around the table as a DM, I've felt like, how quickly can I let go of that, whatever that cool plan was? And typically, sometimes you can make a way to bring it back around or take of it. But there's the thing I always come back to is, it is always more interesting to go where this group has gone. You're on a river, of floating down the story river. Like if it's on rails, if I try to fight to make something on rails, that makes it less fun for me, even though I had that feeling, that legit, like, oh no, I'm story sad for a minute.
I too have been story sad, both in the room and at the table, but I will absolutely use that term from now on, Ryan. But especially like, I sometimes bring terrain and stuff to play on, and it's like, oh, I had in my bag, I've got this cool terrain. I guess we're not going to that awesome place now. Sort of letting that go. And, I'm sort of resigned to the fact that these knuckleheads are going to do whatever they want to do anyway. So I kind of am at their mercy a lot. But yeah, like Ryan said, you often, if something is cool and fun enough, and if you're sure that they're going to enjoy it, you can sort of often find ways to incorporate that element, regardless of what's been happening. And it's ultimately still collaborative. But yeah, if you've got this cool cemetery terrain that you want to use, you find a way to put it in, or put it in next time, or use it in a different game or something like that.
In Nerd Poker in the campaign right now, our dungeon master Dan Telfer got one of our listeners is also an animator and a designer. His name is Sean Bryant, and the two of them secretly behind the scenes collaborated, and Sean designed a type of monster that apparently is going to recur throughout it, and then did a 3D printing of a mini for us to use. And so I guess at some point or another, Dan had a plan to sort of spring it on us. But of course, we went straight towards it, and he had no time to prep. So all of a sudden, he pulled out this half-painted mini out of his bag that apparently was still wet. And it kind of made a point after we fought that one. He's like, "Don't worry, you'll be seeing this guy a lot more and much better painted." And just, you can see just in that moment the expression of, "This is not how this was supposed to go." But don't worry, like you guys said, he still has it in his pocket, and it's coming back another time.
Chris, there's a follow-up I wanted to ask you, which was Ryan was talking about how D&D is just for him and the people playing. But on Nerd Poker, that's not the case. Does playing D&D on Nerd Poker, because you know that an audience outside of the game will be listening, feel different than like a home game?
It does. And I think this is something I would share with Matt and Ryan. As improvisers, you just kind of have this sense of, I'm playing, but I'm playing with other people. So like when you're improvising in a scene, you're aware of an audience, but you're also very much like, in my head, no matter what we're doing, I kind of think of it like we're playing catch. I throw the ball to you, you throw the ball to her, she throws it back to me. And sort of like, that's sort of how we do our storytelling. We're all playing together, even if we're characters who are angry at each other. Behind the scenes, we're all people working together. And I feel like when you're, playing in front of an audience, I try and not stumble for words as much. I probably don't take as much time to think about things as maybe I would if there wasn't someone listening, but by definition, it's a show. So you want it first and foremost to be a show that people are listening to, especially with podcasts and things like this. Anytime just eating on a microphone, which at Dungeons and Dragons, I feel like eating and drinking is part of the game. Whereas when you're recording it, you don't really want to hear that 12-inch Subway sandwich being devoured on mic.
Right. Yes. Yeah, that's absolutely true. So looking at sort of screenwriting and RPGs, do you think there are lessons or techniques or rules in screenwriting that we can use in RPG play? And why don't we start with you, Ryan?
Yeah, in terms of rules is a tricky word for me, because I feel like, how about I phrase it as questions to ask? Only because I love the idea of rules, and then every time I embrace one, I find out a way to break it, and then I go like, "Oh, why did I go down that road?" But here, some questions we ask in our writers' room, and again, we're writing like a live in front of an audience sitcom, so in some ways couldn't be more different than the fantasy worlds that we're playing in D&D. But there are similarities. One question that our showrunner on our show, who's awesome, he asks all the time, when we come up with this really clever, intricate story, he goes, "Hold on, what would really happen?" And obviously, we're talking about a sitcom, so the word "really" is doing a lot of work there, because it's a pretend show. We're making it up. What would really happen? Whatever we want. And we're all like, yeah, why don't we just do this? But I think what he means when he says what would really happen is, emotionally, for these characters in this situation, if they were in the real world, would the guy behind the counter at Starbucks jump over the counter? Maybe it's funny for the scene we've made up, but hold on. Is that going to pull the audience out? Because all of a sudden, it's not even the world we were in before. And I feel like in RPGs, it's easy for me when I'm DMing, because there's so, for example, if there's a combat encounter, there's so much going on as the DM to keep track of the stat block of the monster and where is everybody and all that. Sometimes I forget to ask what would really happen. And sometimes the answer is the monster would run away, or the monster would call for help, or the monster would hide behind that rock. As opposed to, I think my instinct as a DM is keep everybody happy and keep the story moving. And so sometimes it makes sense just to blaze into that encounter and have the monsters just attack. But I know in screenwriting, asking what would happen sometimes leads to a more interesting encounter than just a hack and slash sort of battle. And the other question that we ask all the time in the writer's room is, what does my character want right now? And that's, everyone knows motivation and character motivation, but where's my character at and what do they want? Whenever we're stuck, that usually informs our next move. And especially thinking of RPGs as a scene, The way we write a scene in TV is characters come into the scene and somebody wants something and there's an obstacle and they get over it. And that's all basic screenwriting stuff that I feel like in our culture, with how immersed we are in stories, people know the idea of motivation. But something I did when a campaign I ran last year for Matt and Chris and some of our friends was I made sure coming into the first adventure, the first session rather, that I wanted as a DM to make sure I knew each character had a specific motivation. So the hook wasn't one big hook of let's go fight a dragon. It actually was let's go fight a dragon as a group. But I wanted to make sure that everybody had something specific they wanted from this. And ultimately, I can't speak to their experience, but for me as a DM, it was really fun to see people bringing up their own motivations later and complicating the story that way, in a way that if we had all just said, we're a bunch of adventurers who are going to fight a dragon, I think we would have lost some of that nuance. So those are the questions we ask in the room that I think sort of apply to what we do around the table.
Definitely. That sounds awesome. How about you, Matt? Any questions, techniques, tips that apply to both?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I fully agree with, Ryan's points. Sword fights are super fun, but they're, a lot more satisfying when there are emotional stakes to that fight beyond simple survival. On every episode of Blind Spot, it was really important to explore the emotional story that's intertwined with that week's case. And I think that really applies to gaming as well. Even something just as simple as like getting the characters invested in the NPCs, which can really be kind of easily done by giving those NPCs like inner lives of their own. Like I know in our current Dragon Heist game, this might be a minor spoiler, but I'll keep it pretty vague. Instead of killing Krintz in the Xanathar Guild hideout, the party let him live and just they tied him up. And then what happened off screen, unbeknownst to them, is that Krintz was blamed for the party's raid on the hideout and sort of became persona non grata to the guild. And later on, he approached the party, after losing everything, and he's looking for revenge. But they take pity on him and befriend him because all he ever wanted to do was belong. And now he's the bouncer at Troll Skull Manor. So yeah, stuff like just really thinking about the inner lives of not only the player characters, which is really important, but also in the NPCs, the people that they meet and interact with, can really lead to some just really fun and rich gaming experiences and writing experiences.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's true that like getting the characters invested emotionally, especially in the NPCs, if those are the people they're protecting or trying to save with their questing, right? Or even just the people they're going to fetch the MacGuffin for, right? It helps if those people aren't terrible.
Yeah.
I can't count the number of campaigns where I'm feeling like, okay, I need to start making some people likable because they don't care anymore, right? They're like, well, this guy backstabbed us and this guy just wants money. And, how about you, Chris? Are there places where you see overlap between screenwriting and RPGs in the sense of like lessons and rules, questions that you ask, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think because I come from a comedy background like these guys, I think of a lot of it is in terms of surprise. I think when funny things happen, it's because, either, whatever, a crazy guy in a banana suit walked in, or maybe more related to the characters, it's because, the guy who's always a blowhard has that one thing he's sad about. And all of a sudden the blowhard isn't big. The blowhard is, weeping in the corner. And I think both for writing, and then I think even more importantly, as when you're playing as a player, but even more importantly as a DM, you're trying to create these zigzags so that it's like, whoa, we were just fighting that thing, and now all of a sudden we're having this very personal, quiet moment. And then as a DM, hopefully, like Ryan was saying, you've got so many things to juggle, but hopefully there's that part of your brain going, oh, wait a minute, that one player is kind of quiet. Let's zigzag again and make it so let's put the spotlight on that person right now and bring them in. And maybe the reason they're being quiet is because the player themselves is feeling shy or whatever, or maybe it's because their character doesn't feel tied to what's going on. And by giving them that extra focus, maybe now we have this new element that they start coming to life. But like, well, I really wanted to whatever, find that unicorn. You guys, the unicorn's right over there. And things take off again. So for me, it's very connected to that idea of having a plan, but being so fluid that you can surprise yourself, one player, all the players, so that the story itself keeps living by ebbing and flowing.
Hey everybody, James and Chicasso here. I wanted to let you know that this episode of Tabletop Babble is brought to you by Hero Forge. Yes, you know Hero Forge. They are an incredible service that prints fully customizable 3D miniatures. You go online, the builder's right in your web browser. You can build to your heart's content, make all your modifications, and then order your mini in whatever sort of premium material you want, or get a download file that you can download and print yourself if you've got a 3D printer. They are an incredible company. There are tons and tons of different options to choose from. You want to make turtle people, you want to make half giants, you want to make giant cool centaur folk, all kinds of great options that you can check out. And guess what? On January 14th, that is the day after this podcast launches, they are launching their Kickstarter for a full color, custom miniature Hero Forge 2.0 builder. That's right. I hate painting. Hate it. Don't like doing it. Don't like painting my minis. Not sorry about it. And now I'm never going to have to again, because Hero Forge is going to make the minis of my dreams that I build myself, and they're going to be in color. Go check it out on Kickstarter right now, probably, depending on when you're listening to this. Full color custom miniatures with Hero Forge. Check it out. Tell them DSPN sent you. Let's get back to the babble. This is all awesome advice, and I know that the three of you also have done or continue to do some improv as well. So do you think your improv backgrounds come into play with writing and with role-playing games? How do we see your improv affecting the game and sort of the writing you do? And Chris, why don't we start with you on this one?
Yeah, very much so. I think it's tied to it because I started as an improviser. So I think all things I do, acting and writing and RPG stuff, are all connected to those same instincts or muscles. What I really like, the way Ryan put it before about sort of gathering around a campfire, that's what I think when RPGs are at their strongest for me, is like the moment Matt said before when everybody's laughing about we can't get over the fence. It's great. It's because we're all huddled together in a circle telling the story, and one person might be leading the story, but the environment is fluid enough that when Ryan says, "Oh, but what about this spell?" and everybody goes, yeah, let's try that spell, and we get excited, and then the dice say, "Nope, doesn't work. Try it again." And that the dice aspect, the randomization, that's what I think makes the D&D so exciting, is because you could have the greatest, whatever, level 20 paladin, but if the dice say, "Nope, you suck that day. You can't get anything done." And I love that community feeling of I'm just not doing it, so it's up to you guys to save the day.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And that fence scene feels like something you would see at an improv show, right? The we can't get over the wall, we can't get over the fence. Like that would totally be a hilarious scene, I think, to go watch. What about you, Matt? How does your improv background come into play with writing in RPGs?
It's really been like one of the most useful tools that I could have imagined as a writer. I mean, every script and role-playing scenario is essentially an exercise in what happens next, which is, the core of improvisation. And, the value of that simple concept of yes and cannot really be overstated. Some of the best things in any game and in any script happen when the writer, the DM, the players all allow themselves the freedom to just explore what if this happened, and then everybody jumping on it, building on it, creating that sort of collaborative mindset around, building this great moment together. They're very similar in that way. And one has really fed the other in a really key way for me.
Nice. And how about you, Ryan?
Yeah, I see what we do around the table with RPGs and improv. It's almost the same thing, except again, for improv, usually there's an audience. And something I love right now about RPGs is we are our own audience. But for me, it's about the collaboration. I think also as a screenwriter, I keep feeling safe when I'm in a group. There's just an understanding I have about my own work. I love writing alone, and I need to do that a lot. But I really believe that anything I made on my own isn't as good as what a group might come up with. And there's a humility to that I think has been helpful in my career of encountering other people and saying, here's a thing, and then them yes-anding that and adding to that. So with improv and screenwriting and RPGs, it's for me, and I know it's different for other people, but for me, it's all about what can this group come up with together? Because that does a few things. It takes the pressure off of me to feel like I have to have all the answers. And it surprises me because things come up that I never could have thought of. And the other thing, improv for me, I haven't done much improv lately, but I've played a lot of music as well. And Matt and I played in a bluegrass band for a long time. And playing in a band for me is the same thing as an RPG. It's the same thing as screenwriting in a group. It's just, what can we come up with together that's bigger than any of us could come up with on our own?
Nice. Yeah, very true. I love that. That is so cool. So we are winding down here. We're almost out of time, but I want to quickly just go around the table and ask you all, do you think RPGs have improved your screenwriting in any way? And let's start with you, Matt. Do you think playing RPGs has improved your skills as a writer?
Oh, absolutely. And the first thing that really jumps to mind for me is like, screenwriting is often about getting your characters in trouble and then having them find their way out of it. And I found that putting myself in the sort of the mindset of a D&D group, or when brainstorming ideas for how to get characters out of the trouble that they're in or accomplish their goals, that's sort of been one of the primary ways to incorporate my RPG experience into the screenwriting stuff.
Cool. How about you, Ryan?
Yeah, I think for me, it's and I mentioned this before. It's the joy of RPGs are a reminder for me of the joy I find in storytelling as a group. And there are times at my job where the hours can be really long and stories get thrown out for some reason, and it can be, like any job, can be frustrating and hard at times. And if I know that Sunday night I'm going to meet up with my friends and play an RPG, it's the kind of reminder of how much fun storytelling is and why I got into the screenwriting business in the first place.
Nice. And Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that occurred to me while you guys were talking is that in the screenwriting world, you're, at least in sitcoms and comedy and stuff, you're trying to make this very funny thing and you have many, many jokes, but then because of other things like the episode is too long or for whatever reason, scenes need to get cut, a lot of times the first thing to go are your written jokes. And it's a really interesting sort of emotional place to realize, like, oh, I'm trying to create this for a sitcom. I'm trying to create a joke machine, and the jokes themselves are disposable. We can always come up with more jokes. We can always change things out. And finding that freedom to me is so organic as a part of RPGs, where it's just like, it's just us together. And if if I roll my dice and my sword doesn't hit, somebody else will come in. And so to me, that sort of, I heard a friend describe one time as like being a water ninja, just sort of like that fluid, anything can happen in RPGs. I've found very helpful when trying to go into screenwriting, where it's just like, anything's disposable, anything can happen. And I shouldn't ever be too precious about clinging on to, my one thing, because like Ryan said, when you're doing it with a group, it can inevitably just get better.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's great. So there you go, everybody. If you want to work on your screenwriting skills, play a lot of D&D.
Yes.
So before we go, is there anything else that y'all wanted to mention before we wrap up and people find out where they can find you?
Somebody email me the secret to solving Waterdeep, because we're playing it right now and I cannot figure out this mystery.
Oh, well.
You're talking to the right guy.
Yeah, I was going to say, we can talk later.
James, I actually have a thing. I just wanted to say it's been really cool to listen to your podcast, and all the community of people talking about RPGs is something that helped bring me back into it. And it's just really cool that you and a bunch of other people are making cool stuff to build these communities, because no one is in in their little cave anymore if they don't want to be, in terms of collaborating and learning from other people. So thank you for putting this podcast out there.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. Thank you. It means a lot to me that you listen. That's great. Thank you so much.
I think that I think part of the reason I fell away when I was younger is because it didn't feel like I had other people to play with a lot of the time. And I think one of the greatest gifts of RPGs in this day and age is that it's like, because of the internet and texting and FaceTime and stuff, you can play now with anybody whenever you want. And between the podcast and just the enthusiasm of a dedicated community, it really does make you feel like you're part of a really cool group. And I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a great time to be part of role-playing games, and just super fun and amazing. So thank you all for joining me today. Before we go, let's go around the table, let people know where they can find you. Matt, let's start with you.
Sure. I am at this Matt Young on Twitter, and on Instagram, I post pictures of board games, role-playing games, and stuff like that. I'm Matt Young Script on Instagram.
Excellent. And where can people find you, Chris?
I on Twitter and Instagram, I am at Mr. Chris Tallman, MrChristallaman. You can listen to Nerd Poker. We have a Patreon if you want to listen to bonus episodes. And other than that, it's a lot. I was on a Nickelodeon show, so a lot of my posts are Nickelodeon related. But every once in a while, I get some D&D in there.
Excellent. And where can people find you, Ryan?
Hey, I'm on Twitter at Ryan Raditz, just my name. I don't post there much, but you can find me there. And then you can find my work. The Neighborhood is on CBS on Monday nights at 8 p.m. And the episode with D&D, if anyone's interested in it, was called "Welcome to the Bully" in season 2. So that has a little fun Dungeons and Dragons going on.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. Dungeons and Dragons and Bullies.
I was just going to say the Blind Spot will be returning in 2020 for the final season. We hit 100 episodes, so make sure to get caught up and then watch the exciting conclusion of Blind Spot.
Yes.
Matt, can you spoil the ending for us right now? It's like an exclusive.
Yes, I can. Yes, but I won't.
Yeah. Well, there you go. And so Matt, should we also say that, like, hey, if you're looking for a writer,
absolutely, yeah, have keyboard will travel. So yeah, absolutely,
awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining me today. This was awesome. This was a dream come true. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James.
Wow, that was a great podcast. People, if you are loving the show, you should head on over to patreon.com/Intricasso. That's patreon.com/Intricasso, where you can, for as little as $1 a month, and I hope this show is worth at least $1 a month to you, get a monthly survey where you get to pick upcoming topics and leave me feedback for Tabletop Babble. I would love it if you could do that. And if you're already doing that, thank you so much. This show isn't cheap to make, and you make it much easier. Thank you so much. And guess what? Maybe you're thinking like, oh man, I already contribute on Patreon. I wish I could help out more. Or maybe you're thinking like, oh, I don't have the money. I totally understand. Guess what? You can help us out for free. You can help other people find the show by leaving us an iTunes review. It seriously helps so much. If you're listening in Apple Podcasts right now, you can just slide on over in this app that you are currently have open and are listening to us in, and just tap 5 stars. If you leave us a review and it's 5 stars, I'll read it out loud. You can make me say anything you want. Like JR411 from the US, who left a 5-star review entitled 5-Star Review. And it says, 5-star review because James told me to. Great podcast to keep up with what is happening in the RPG world. Keep up the great work. Thank you so much, JR411. People, I want to talk to you about a special project I've got going on right now. It's called My Dad's Monster Manual. What am I doing? I'm rewriting the Monster Manual with my dad. That's right. I'm showing him the art from the Monster Manual with none of the names or descriptions, and I'm letting him describe the creature to me and give it a name, and then I am statting up the creature and organizing all the lore and that kind of thing. I'm working with some great people on this, and it's going to be coming out at some point. But what I need is your help. If you would like a free copy of this, a free PDF when it launches, you can do that by helping us playtest some of the creatures. If you want to sign up for the playtest, go to worldbuilderblog.com. That's my website. You'll see in the latest entry that there are links there where you can sign up for the playtest. Come help us out. And like I said, for my gratitude, I will, of course, send you a free PDF copy when it's all said and done. Plus, you'll get some fun monsters in the meantime. There's more information about what My Dad's Monster Manual is all about over there at worldbuilderblog.me or .com as well. Finally, I want to remind you about Capers. The Capers Kickstarter is going on right now for the deluxe hardcover edition of the game. You're definitely going to want to check it out. Craig has been on this show a lot. Craig Campbell, he's an amazing game designer. I got to help write a tiny portion of the rules in Capers. It was super fun. It's a great game. Go check it out. Search for Capers Deluxe Hardcover or Capers RPG over on Kickstarter, and you will find it. Whether you love the game, this deluxe hardcover is going to be beautiful and nice and the best version of the game there is. Or if you've never checked out the game before, now's a perfect time to. All kinds of different backer rewards and stuff in there, so go check it out. Tabletop Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. Thanks to Rudy Basso for founding it with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by Battle Bards. Don't forget, RPGs are like sex. Hey people, just wanted to let you know that the episode of Tabletop Babble you just listened to was brought to you by Elderwood Academy. Elderwood Academy are the makers of fine gaming products. You've heard me talk about them. I've talked about their amazing dice boxes before that look like spell books. I have talked about their dice. I've talked about their card boxes. I've talked about their incredible hex trays. All things seem to come in mini as well, so they're easily and transportable if you want them, or you can get a big and bold version. Everything's customizable, comes with amazing leather. It is just so great. But there is something very important we need to talk about, and that is the Dice Catapult Kit. That's right. The Dice Catapult Kit lets you launch dice across the room with this mini catapult that you assemble that is all ready and easy to make for you. Oh my gosh, it's so fun. You're definitely going to want to check it out. Use it to launch dice at ornery GMs and players alike. The Dice Catapult Kit is available from Elderwood Academy. Go check it out at elderwoodacademy.com/don't split. That's elderwoodacademy.com/don't split.